is Octave Leap. Innovation, regeneration, and human optimization.
Welcome back to the Blade and Chalice podcast. And our slogan is innovation, regeneration, and human optimization. And this week's guest is going to touch on all of those. So I'm very pleased to welcome Adam Suzman to the Octave Leap podcast, because we're here to talk about something that is super exciting. As many of you know, I spent 12 years as a groundwater engineer, so water is something I enjoy, and now I work a lot with frequencies. And this man, well, every day he programs water with various frequencies. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Adam.
Thank you, Dave. So I'd just like to introduce myself. I was a homeopathic doctor for 20 years. And then out of that, I came to an understanding that there were just too many people, and I needed to actually develop a system of medicine to work on the various levels and problems that people face on a more general level. So I developed the system, which is basically programming water. I find a way to bring the frequency of substances into water and then amplify them, which is where it differs from homeopathy, because the frequency is much stronger, so it delivers a punch, which is what you want. So you actually feel it when you take it. It's not like you take it, it's like, well, did it work, didn't it? People are like, wow, this works within seconds. So it's a much stronger dose. And what I'm really trying to do here is a few things, is to remove obstacles in the path that we all go through on our way to optimization, but then to actually install certain frequencies into the field, into the body, so that we're actually operating at a frequency we want to be operating on, not to kind of leave everything up to chance. I mean, it's like one of my creations is like called creation, and it's about your best day ever. Just having the frequency of what it would feel like if you're at your best, and not having to worry about whether you are or aren't going to be at your best, because you just take a substance which has been programmed with some of the most beautiful substances known to man, and then that instills the frequency into your cells. As we all know, that the water in our body is programmable, it's informative, it's like a liquid crystal dynamic substance which allows us to communicate with, and it communicates to us. So what I'm doing here essentially is like I'm imprinting these frequencies onto water to say, well, this is what I want to feel like at this point. Now, there's a lot of scope to the work I do. I mean, that is one side of it. The other one is actually removing the obstacles that are, potentially impeding us in our process. And I think Dave has some experience with liberation. This was my first remedy, which was designed to literally peel away old unfinished memory. So to bring all the unfinished bits and pieces to completion. So, for example, when I started taking it, it went through all my ex-girlfriends. It's like I would dream about them, I would have resolution. Sometimes we would be like friendly, sometimes not so friendly, but each time there'd be the sense of, now we've moved on. Like sometimes there's the giving of gifts, the exchanging. All of this happens in dreams. Sometimes it happens in real life. I had a friend of mine in Dubai, and I gave her liberation for the first time. And on that day, 3 of her ex-boyfriends phoned her on the same day. And what this was saying to her is like, well, either you want these people in your life or you don't, but make a choice and then either pick it up or put it down or turn it into something else. So, when we think of a lot of unfinished memory, it's like arrows that have pierced us and been broken off, and we haven't been able to complete the storyline. What this does is it allows the completion of the storyline by connecting the 2 pieces, and then we can actually pull the arrow out, and which leaves space for a new narrative, a new outcome.
Well, that sounds absolutely wonderful. I do have a question, though. Yeah, I have a question, though. You mentioned you're programming frequencies in water, and I was telling somebody about the experience with liberation, and they kind of got a little bit like, oh no, like, am I being programmed with something? And so,
no. I mean, it's terminology. I mean, it's literally, in a sense, whenever we have an intention, we bring it into form, whether it's a good intention. Prayer is a good example. People pray, and that is a way of concentrating the mind and focusing thought. But if it's done from a different angle, people might consider it to be voodoo, for example. But it's the same mind perception of moving of thought in a particular direction. Now, what I'm programming here is, I mean, I've really curated the finest substances I could find. For example, the one that does a lot of the work in the substance liberation is made from, it's something called Navaratna. It's 9 gems, and each of these gems has been burnt 100 times. It's part of an ancient Hindu technique called Rasha Shastra, which is about distilling the essence by continual purification. So it's very much an alchemical process, but it's very detailed. So each of these substances literally gets burnt 100 times. Then they put it together, and then when you consume this, what happens is that it brings the karmic residue to the surface in terms of what's happened or the unfinished things. I mean, what I came to realize is we often think of karma as what happened, right? But the other side of karma, the flip side of karma, is what didn't happen, right? And this is often they talk about people needing to be reborn to have an experience of what didn't happen. They didn't marry the woman, and they always wondered what would have happened if they'd married them. So, I mean, an example of this, when I was taking the liberation on about the 3rd day, I took it, and I'd had some very bad breakup a long time ago, and I'd forgotten about it, and she'd gone off, and that was that. And in the dream, she was pregnant. We were happy. She was 9 months pregnant. We were happy. It didn't happen. I woke up. I've now got a daughter with someone else. It's a completely different story. But my body was able to finish the story and let go. And then it knew what it needed. And it was like, oh, that's what would have happened. And I almost felt something leave me, something slide out of me, like a big sigh that exited the body. And this is how it works. It really brings the unfinished to completion, so that the body somatically can have the experience and we can actually let go of it. And this is massive. I mean, Carl Jung said that something done in a dream is the same as something done in the world. And if we can do something in a dream and really have resolution there, the body doesn't draw a distinction between, well, was it in real life or in a dream? The body perceives it as this is what happened. And if we can get the body and the nervous system, more importantly, I mean, I'll talk more about the nervous system later, but if we can get the nervous system to relax, truly relax and let go, that's where real healing and regeneration occurs. Because most of the time, the nervous system is in this fraught state of flight or fright or concern about reality. But if we can speak directly to the nervous system, and that's what these remedies do, because they slide in under the radar and they go to the level where we begin to program reality. I mean, I use program because I mean, there's probably better words, but install stuff in our head. I mean, I'm looking at it more as the computer, as the metaphor for the head of the body and the mind and people. I mean, we could use the car as the metaphor for the mind. I'd say, well, okay, we could put in better tires, or we can actually get rid of some of the junk in the trunk. I mean, these are all metaphors for the mind as creations of humanity. They all kind of symbolize us on some level, you know? So, I mean, I don't want to trip over, syntax, over words, over programming or anything like that, because there's nothing like that. But, if, in a sense, when you eat, say, an organic meal, you're eating a meal that's been curated and programmed in a certain way. When you eat something with pesticides, it's being curated and, dosed in other ways. So you're kind of getting programming that's coming from the outside, and you're consuming it. You're internalizing it. So what we're doing here is we're just being very particular about what we're consuming, because we're quite particular about what we consume with our diet, but what we consume mentally in terms of content, we're often a bit more lazy with. And when it comes to frequency, it's not an area that's really, understood or talked about. And in fact, a lot of what I've done has been to play with water. Now, I know you have an interest in water, Dave, but for the others who don't necessarily know as much about water, I mean, what I start with is distilled water. Now, distilled water is hungry water. It's water where a lot of the minerals and the substances have been taken out. So it's kind of empty water, but it's hungry. So when we put anything into it, it'll grab onto it. So we start with the distilled water, which is like the blank slate, and onto that, I kind of see myself as a painter or as a sculptor. I'm actually creating works of art in 3D, in form, in water, and water is the medium that I'm using. I mean, what I've been able to do with the technique I've developed is to make much stronger frequencies so that they're felt by everyone, because the challenge initially was, you take it, or do you even feel it? I wanted to move beyond that to a point where everyone's like 3 seconds like, wow, I can really feel this. This is what you want. And I mean, the truth is, when we take a lot of supplements, we don't know if they're really working. You take the vitamin C, did it work? Maybe, maybe not. Am I healthier? Maybe, maybe not. But when you take some of these substances, you'll know within a couple of minutes that it's actually altered your mood for the better. Now, as a homeopathic doctor, obviously working for 20 years, I mean, you spend all your time trying to get people to feel better. So yes, you could program it in a negative way, but it's almost like, what would be the point? You want to really deliver the finest offering you can to people so that they can use these substances to transform their lives. And this is what this is. It's a technology which we can use in conjunction with a variety of other things. I mean, a lot of my clients are actually psychologists, and not clients, I mean, they buy in bulk because they're actually feeding it to their patients, and the patients are taking it, they're having the dreams, which they then talk about with the psychologist, but it drives the process. Instead of having to go digging for potatoes, the potatoes are all turned up and out right in front of us, and we can actually chop them up and fry them and have a meal. So this is what it does. It really begins the process, but I've gone to great lengths to make this process as gentle as possible, because what I saw as well as a homeopathic doctor for those 20 years was that there's so much trauma, and if you re-traumatize the person in the process of the healing, that'll set up another chain of a causal chain of trauma, and then you have to undo that, and it's always, you end up chasing your tail. But if we can deliver a substance, and I call this the chocolate ice cream mode of delivery. So you deliver the substance which is so pleasant to the body, and the body accepts it. There's less trauma. It's easier for us to just let go of things if we're feeling good. So a lot of my remedies have substances in them that just make people feel good,
Would you say that people that tend to do the more arduous grind of the healing journey, you see people that are like these healing warriors, that they're often re-traumatizing themselves, creating new traumas in the process of trying to address their pre-existing traumas, and then have to then address what they've created along the way, and make the journey actually much longer than it needs to be?
And even more than that, become addicted to the process of processing. I've met people who, like, 10 years later, I see them again, like, how are you? I was still processing. It's like, haven't you processed enough? Like, can't we move on to the fun part? Can't we go to the beach now? It's almost like an intoxication. But
well, I think of like sometimes these healing circles. I mean, if you have a healing circle, you kind of form a community. You don't want anyone to get fully healed and then they never come back again, right?
Well, that's it. So, I mean, well, what I've seen as well is there's a lot. There's a lot underlying. I mean, I've just recently hit another whole level of childhood stuff that I wasn't even aware was there. But at each time, and this is what we see as well, especially with substances like liberation, that every memory that we deal with and we bring to completion and falls away leaves us lighter. Now, I mean, I'm going to use another analogy here because it's quite useful, because what I saw with myself was when I made liberation, I was exhausted. I had too many patients, too much childcare. I was pretty much raising my daughter by myself. Not enough energy. I was exhausted. But when I started, making the changes that these remedies started to initiate by letting go of a lot of the stuff and bringing it to completion and being able to, like, throw the concrete over the side of the boat, I literally felt the boat lifting up in the water. I mean, this was the self. I was no longer carrying all this memory. And I realized that, I was literally walking around with this backpack of unfinished business from the past. If you had a backpack and you were to unpack it, it's like, okay, here's this ex-girlfriend, this one, this one, this one, and here's my broken friendships, and there's some unresolved family stuff. And it was just a case of turfing it over the side by bringing it to my attention, making peace with it, and just actually allowing the body to say, like, okay, that's done. Shake hands with it and then finish it and then move on. And what happens then is that obviously your energy spikes because you're not carrying as much stuff. So the actual act of living is less laborious because we're not carrying as much heaviness from the past. And then we can really begin on the process of healing in itself. Some of my other remedies deal with the patterns around because what I saw was, if you imagine on the one side is memory and memories that lock us in the past, the unfinished memories. Well, if we bring these to completion, but then there's still the patterns that arose from those memories. So if we imagine the memory was getting bitten by a dog, right? But out of that, we went into a flinch. And the flinch was like, oh, I'm going to get bitten by a dog. And every time we walk past a dog, and the dog barks, we go into like flight or fright, right? So we're essentially playing a pattern based on memory. Now we can get rid of the memory of getting bitten by the dog, but the body still remembers the response. So two of the remedies, redemption and then panacea, are literally around working directly on the patterning to bring it to our attention, to shine a mirror on it so we can actually see what it is. And by seeing it, we can actually begin to let go of it. It's not as simple as all that, because I mean, the process of trauma is quite extensive. But if we can see it, if we can see our reaction just for a moment, then we can often choose something else. It's the problem is the nervous system is quite unconscious, and when something gets triggered, we run with it, and we're right in this flight or fright, and then we're back in the scared child. And then it's very difficult to negotiate with that. But if we can see our reaction from above and look down upon ourselves, and this is what these two work with, then we can begin to get insight into how we're working, and then we can choose a new path. And that's what this is all about, choosing a different way of doing things, because, a lot of our lives, we weren't really, we weren't given the choice of like, do you want to do this? It's like, yes, you must do this. As a child, you must do this. You must go play with this child or go to the school or do this. We weren't given a choice, and our body might not have necessarily been happy with it. And we're often suffering from a lot of those responses even now. I mean, the more you dig down, the more you see how those childhood wounds are really conditioning our behavior. But once we can bring them to light, we can really see what's going on. Then we can begin to let them go. But the other thing I wanted to talk about was just this mood of enjoyment. Like with the liberation, I put in a lot of fun things. I put in like the light of Jupiter. I put in Reishi. Into creation. I put.
I'm sure people have heard of Reishi, but light of Jupiter, I know what that is.
Yeah, okay.
I think that deserves a bit of a.
Yeah, this deserves a bit of explanation. Okay, so the light of Jupiter was actually made by the Russians. I know they're not very popular at the moment, but back in the day, this was 10 years ago before they decided to invade Ukraine. But so what they did, it was a bunch of homeopaths who they took a bowl of water, and as I said, what homeopaths do is we program, or we extract the frequency of water, and we instill it into, or the frequency of the substance, we instill it into water. Now, obviously, it's easy if we have like a mushroom or a herb or a mineral or something. But if it's an intangible thing like light, we obviously have to get a bit creative. So what they did was, they took a telescope and they focused it on Jupiter for the full night. I mean, the declination of the planet as it moved. They had an electric telescope and it moved with the planet. So that for the whole night, Jupiter, the light shining from Jupiter was shining through, and where the eyepiece was, there was a bowl of water. And I don't know how they stopped it. Maybe it was in a jar or something, but it was basically the light was going into the water. And at the end of that, they took the water and then they sort of succussed it, which is the homeopathic process whereby the frequency gets fixed, if you like, in a substance, and then they took it. And what came out of that, they had no idea what was going to happen, but they took the light of Jupiter, and then they all went into this quite euphoric space where they were like, call the musicians, bring the vodka, bring some food, let's celebrate. But not in a kind of decadent way, but just in a celebratory way, very much like the feeling of Jupiter. Now, I was a bit skeptical about astrology until I actually took this light of Jupiter, and there I was, like talking to the petrol attendants and like saying, let's have more of this. I just became like a more open, expanded person, which was amazing. So that goes into the liberation and the creation, because I wanted people to treat the healing journey as an adventure and as a fun thing, as opposed to like, oh no, I've got 20 years of processing to go through, and most of it's going to be on my knees crying, or, just wringing my hands, or just in a terrible space of having to confess my deepest feelings to strangers or speaking to psychologists. I don't want that to be people's fate, because I think it's a very beautiful journey, and it's very personal. And if we choose to share it, that's fine. But I acknowledge as well that a lot of people are quite private, and they don't necessarily want to share their journey, and they might just prefer to go through this thing themselves. So let me just tell you a story of like this liberation, how it worked. There was a woman in England, and she'd been fighting with her family for 10 years, and they hadn't spoken. So she's driving home to her little town, through their little town, on the way through, and her car breaks down. She's been 3 or 4 days on liberation. The car happens to break down 50 meters from their house. So she's forced to go ask them for help because the car's now broken down. It's night. She walks in the door, and because she's on liberation and more open, she bursts into tears. The father, seeing this, bursts into tears. They both hug each other and they cry for an hour. The mother's watching. She's in tears. And in that hour, 10 years of pain and suffering and resentment is washed away, and they will realize that they can forgive and move on. So massive healing, massive healing. Another one, this woman was having a dream of her mother died, and she never got to say goodbye to the mother, right? So she's been on liberation now for a week, and in the dream, the mother comes through the clouds and is able to actually give her a hug in the dream, and she hugs the mother. And in that, she's able to say goodbye. She just needed that final goodbye because she wasn't there with the mother, and that was plaguing her. She wasn't able to make the connection. But this allowed the psyche to open up to the level where resolution was able to transpire. Now, in liberation, it's quite a complex formula. There's other things as well. That's not the only substance in there. The other substance in there is shungite, which is a fairly interesting substance on many levels because it's able to clean water. So if you put shungite into dirty water, it'll actually absorb a lot of the toxic material in there and clean it. But, if we make a remedy from shungite and we put it in with this, what it's doing is it's going into the blood and it's pulling all the junk to it. So as we're digging with the 9 gems, we're cleaning with the shungite. We're purifying the blood. Now, blood is obviously water, and in Chinese medicine, they say blood carries mind. So when you're purifying the blood or the water in the blood, you're purifying the mind stream. So my intention was to dig it up, clear it, and then wash it away and move it forward. And this is exactly what it does. I see this as very much a technology of healing and
we just got a question.
Totally.
When you release your trauma, it might be very important that you're with someone who can hold a space for containing. So is that something that's somebody should be aware of taking the remedies, especially if it prompts sort of these powerful experiences?
It's what I've done with this is I've couched it in a lot of substances which make people feel very held, right? So I've made it as kind of bulletproof as possible in terms of, for me, I'll go through anything if a friend's by my side, I'll go through the worst stuff but we can still chat and we can talk about it. It's when we're isolated and alone. And so what I've tried to do with this substance is to give people the feeling of being held and to being excited by the journey. My idea is you're dropping the trauma and the karma a bit, but you're skipping down the street whistling. So I've gone to great lengths to put the skipping down the street whistling stuff in because I realized that to process some of the heavier stuff that's being brought up, and a lot of it gets brought up in dreams. So even if we wanted people to be there, they're not going to be there. Some of it comes up in real life. And I think this is why psychologists buy quite a lot of this stuff from me, because it really gives them a lot to work with. They can actually get back to, they put the person on and they take it. And it's what did you dream? And okay, they can talk through everything they went through. But, we're not all in the position to do that. And, for me, it was every night, I didn't know what this stuff was going to do when I made it. And every night I would go to sleep. It's ooh, what's the next chapter? I can't wait to see what next thing is in the bag. And it's I got quite excited. I would go to bed, take a dose, and what's the next chapter going to be? Because I knew it would be something interesting. And sometimes it was a little bit painful, but there was always a sense of resolution. And when I look back on, I took it for about a year. There was about a year's worth of memory to process. It was about old girlfriends 2-3 months, old friends 2-3 months, family 2-3 months, and then acquaintances 2-3 months. And by the end of that, there wasn't much left, because I was you'd squeeze the bottom of the lemon and there wasn't much left after that in terms of traumatic stuff. But I took a dose recently and it was interesting. It brought some recent stuff to light and helped to resolve that. So, it has a lot of applications, but for me, anyone will be improved by taking the substance, because it's a way of processing stuff that we don't normally have access to, because the substance, the nine gems, was made by a man called Nagarjuna. He wrote the Middle Way, the Madhyamika, but he was a Buddhist alchemist. He was an enlightened Buddhist alchemist. And why he decided to burn these 9 gems 100 times, I still don't know. Maybe it was an idea, maybe it was on a whim, but it takes a lot of time. It takes a year to make this stuff, because it's a laborious task. You've got to burn each one again and again and again 100 times. And then there's another ingredient in the liberation, which is the 5 fires. Now, this is an equally interesting ingredient. It's called Panch Agni. The 5th fire is the sun. It's based on, so someone sits in the middle of like a diamond, and there's 4 fires around them, and they're chanting this mantra of purification. It's a victory over death mantra, and they chant and they chant and they chant, and they swap the people out. But one guy chanted pretty much consistently for 10 years, and someone's been doing it for the last 40 years. But they swap the people out. But the idea is the fires never go out, the chant never stops. They swap the people out. They just kind of take turns. It's like a relay. And I got some of the ash from this, right? And the idea of this is like, the purpose of going into the fires is to purify, the passions, the poisons from the body. So anger, lust, jealousy, that stuff. So that's in there as well. So it's also designed to burn up our attachment to that, so we don't get dragged into that. So it's really a very complex substance. It's a very beautiful substance. When I look at it, what I've done with it, it's like it's a Michelangelo. It's a work of art. It's an energetic work of art, but it's really a beautiful creation, because a lot of the stuff in there is really, it's all this kind of fairly heavy stuff, but then it's really buffered by some very beautiful, gentle stuff, so that the process can be enjoyable.
Yeah, I got to say, Adam did give me some samples of these to try out. Naturally, I was curious. I'm like, where do I get my hands on this stuff? Because when I heard him talk about it, I'm like, I have to try this. This is incredible. And I took Liberation. Liberation is the one I sort of gravitated towards first, even though he gave me about 7 or 8 of them. And I've been taking that consistently. And the first time I took it, within minutes, I felt this dissolving of emotional sort of heaviness around the chest and stomach area. And it felt really nice. That night I went to bed. And for years since I went out on my own and became an entrepreneur, I've been dreaming about my old work. It's like this recurring nightmare of being stuck in a cubicle and that type of thing. And all of a sudden I had a very joyous experience of once again working, and I reconnected with sort of that spirit of it. And it was really wonderful, because just as you said, it brought resolution to this theme that had been recurring. And then when I was going to do my, normal day-to-day stuff in my self-employment, I just did it with a little bit more joy. There was a little bit more lightness there. There wasn't sort of this pressure behind it. And then more recently, I had a dream about an ex-girlfriend from 15 years ago. And we'd sort of been angular since then, meaning, somewhat at odds. But it was really nice, because there's a deep respect, a deep mutual respect that we were able to exchange in that dream. And so exactly as you said it, it's this resolution that comes in the dream world that really allows you to move on and move forward with lightness. And I feel like a lot of people, when we're not aware of what we're carrying around the traumas subconsciously, it's kind of like when your computer's slow and you hit Control-Alt-Delete and the task manager comes up, and you see all these programs that are running behind the scenes that don't not need to be running, right? And that they're eating up memory, they're eating up your energy essentially. And those are just gone.
No, I mean, this is really what a lot of people find with liberation. It was my first remedy. It's possibly, I'll tell you about the Immortal Jellyfish in a second, but let's just finish with liberation. What you also see is it's not just at night. I mean, obviously you weren't born here, Dave. So it's like there's not as much memory around time and place. But I took this liberation when I went back to my hometown, Johannesburg, and whew, it was like during the day I was driving through and I was just being assaulted by memory. It wasn't a bad thing, but it was like memory, driving down was on my bicycle here, there, was with this person there. It was just like a deluge of memory. And I realized that somewhere in my body, you talk about memories on your, like your memory was full of all these old snapshots, these pictures, and they were just sort of taking up space. And all we have to do is really just see them. It wasn't good or bad. It was just like memories, and maybe there was a bit of emotion, but it was like flash, flash, flash. I would go to Garden Center, the local shopping center, and it would be a bit like the Truman Show. Like people would like pop up and they'd be almost like waiting for me to walk past, and then we would sort of interact. But it would be uncanny. I would like, okay, who am I going to run into today? And it would be people from my past, random people. And what I saw with that was there were three options. You can either bring them closer, you can either push them away, or you can say, we're going to have a new interaction. We're going to build a new interaction here. And that was important to realize that in any interaction, we can either bring people closer, we can push them away. But, if it's just in this neutral category where nothing's happening, it's often just taking up space. It's something in the taskbar that's like open, like some graphics thing we open and it's just sitting there. It's not doing anything. We're not even aware of it. But once we get it brought to our attention, we're like, actually, I'm using this. Let me keep this open, or let me close it. Or actually, I'm going to use this to do something else with. The image I had of a lot of this was what liberation does is, if you imagine, it allows us to step into the water. Imagine a river. And now the river is not my space, not your space, but like when I step into the river, it's neutral space. It allows the other person to step into this neutral space. And in this neutral space, we can have a new outcome. This is what it felt like. It was like it allowed you to take the initiative, or in the dream, the initiative's taken, and we're actually, we're doing whatever we're doing. And that's amazing, just to think that there's something like that which will actually help us work through this stuff. Now, whether people are into self-development or optimization, or, everyone wants to be happier. And, this is what I saw in 20 years of treating people. Like, what was it that was really stopping people from being happier, living their dreams? Like you were talking about, like there was more ease around work, and there was just a subtle little thing around it where there was just a little tweak where working was seen as a struggle, and therefore that gets carried on certain levels into all your other activities. But when you unbind that, then it's like everything becomes easier. So when I'm going to talk a bit about immortality now, because it's quite an interesting subject. Is that all right, Dave? Are you done with that?
Yeah. Let's move on to immortality.
No, because we're kind of segueing into this whole thing now. But when I realized, okay, there's memory, there's patterning, but the other thing that's causing us to suffer is old age and disease. Now, disease is another story, but let's look at old age for now. So I got a sample of the immortal jellyfish, Turritopsis dorni. Now, this creature, and it's tiny, it's like that big. It's the size of your finger, your baby finger. It's really small. But this creature, if it gets traumatized or it gets old, it's able to send a message to its cells to return to an earlier version of themselves. And basically what it does is it drops down into a pool of stem cells and, blooms again. So imagine a flower, and it's getting old, or it gets cut, and then it dissolves into itself and then blooms again. So this is what this jellyfish does. So when I got a sample of this jellyfish, this Turritopsis dorni from Japan, I put it in water and I pierced its little tentacle, and then I put it back in the sea afterwards, because I just wanted the message. I wanted to capture the message that it sends back to itself to regenerate. When I took it, I was like, whoa, what if I turn into a baby? Because that's what happens with this jellyfish. I've got an 8-year-old daughter to look after. It's like, it was a concern. I was like, oh, but I've come this far, but I better do it in the name of science. And like the benefits are like, okay, yeah. So it was quite a nervous time. I was like, geez, what happens if I'm now younger than my daughter? And like, she's just 8, who's going to drive her to school? But that didn't happen, because obviously we have a much longer life cycle than the jellyfish. But what did begin to happen was that there was a massive spike in energy. There was a lot of memory came back as well. It was like clearing through the body memory as we almost like return to an earlier, healthier version of ourselves. So it's like, as whatever memory was in the cells, I felt like the memories from my 40s and my 30s and my 20s popping up. And then it culminated in this is all happening during COVID, right? So this deli opens up first time, go get coffee. You know, remember everyone's hysterical. It opens up. I'm in the deli. I'm on the jellyfish, maybe a month or so into it, and I'm regressing into my teens. And I had this incredible urge to pick up this banana and just throw it at the barista. And I was like, whoa, you can't do this. Like, you're a doctor, you know? It's like, but in that moment, I was the 12-year-old boy who just wanted to have a food fight. And it's like, but the feeling in the body was so strong. It brought me right back to that. It was like, I was like, whoa, just stop. Yeah? But I mean, this just showed me how much memory is sitting in the body. Now, it doesn't even have to be good or bad memory. It's just, you know, if you imagine your computer like the mind, it's just taking these snapshots, right? There's no time where we ever like purge files or delete files. It just gets lumped into long-term storage. And then I think there's more and more in long-term storage, just gets more and more clogged. So as you said, everything like a computer runs slower and slower because there's no way to, you know, gather the information or go back and access it. And as people get older, often their memory gets worse because there's just too much clutter. But with
Yeah, it's
liberation
like
and with
the neural pathways and the various pathways in the body, they become either congested or miswired through doing a variety of different things in stress states, and
totally,
it doesn't work as well over
yeah,
time,
yeah.
and we tend to call
But you know
that
what
aging.
what I've really noticed with this is like memory's improved, libido's improved, energy's improved, skin regeneration's improved. I mean, you know, like in the beginning, I wouldn't exercise that much, and I started walking, and then I'd walk an hour a day, and then it's like that wasn't enough. I had too much energy, so then I would swim on top of that. So I'd walk for an hour and then swim for half an hour every day. So of course you get fit, which is great, but it's almost a function of feeling younger. You know, a lot of people who were walkers became runners, runners became trail runners became kite surfers. You know, everyone like leveled up one level because they had more energy, and I remember walking up a hill and there was no effort. It was like I was not under the tyranny of gravity anymore. It's like, wow, this is what it felt like when I was young. You just run up the hill because you got the energy. You don't feel like that weight of age and like, oh, creaky knees. And, you know, my knees regenerated from taking this jellyfish. It's been quite amazing. I mean, there's many different versions I've made of this jellyfish because the body kind of adapts to this
Is that
message after a while.
is this common amongst, homeopathic doctors or anyone that's sort of experimenting to actually use the immortal jellyfish, or is this something that you
I
did
don't
on
know
a
if
whim?
anyone's made it. You know what's different about what I've done is, you know, I amplify the frequency. So if you imagine a frequency as like a wave, right? So in order to generate the wave, you drop like a little pebble in the water, and that would create a ripple. What I'm doing is like I'm amplifying the frequency by creating a bigger pulse, right? That creates a
Mhm.
much bigger ripple. That's why you're able to feel it in, you know, a couple minutes after taking it because it ripples through the whole body. So that's really what I've done. There's also stuff I've done with making it accessible to humans. It works beautifully on animals as well. I mean, people give it to dogs with cancer and the cancer disappears. I don't know where the cancer goes, but it disappears. But you know what happens?
Does human cancer disappear?
It does. We're not really we're supposed to talk about such things, but I mean, a friend of mine applied it topically on his melanoma. He's 66. He's a surfer. He applied this big melanoma like this, and now it's gone. You know,
Mm.
it's a topical application to that, and it's, you know, the way we can look at this from a Chinese medicine perspective is because I'm puzzled about what's happening here. You know, the in Chinese medicine they talk about kidney qi, which is life force, and as we get older, this kidney qi kind of drops and diminishes. Now, kidney qi governs, you know, virility, skin tone, health, energy, you know, functionality, you know, good reproduction of the genes, and you know, the telomeres not shortening. This is what this stuff does, right? But as we get older, this stuff sort of diminishes. Now, if you want to think of it as um, these are like the kidney qi is like the sheepdogs, and they keep the cells, which would be the sheep, in line. So what happens with cancer is that the cells start to grow, and the sheepdogs would normally keep it in line. But as the sheepdogs get older and longer in the tooth, these cells start to drift off into other areas and start growing elsewhere. But what this does, as it boosts the kidney qi, a sheepdog suddenly get a B12 injection in the bum and they get all bouncy and they're able to keep these cancer cells in line. So this is what happens. I mean, it's consistent with, well, for women, hair growth, it's amazing. Women report big manes of hair from taking Immortality. Men, it's male pattern baldness. It's a different story. The
Well, I took Immortality one day and I forgot that I took it. And later in the day, somebody says, "You're glowing. What did you do today?" And I said, "Oh yeah, it was this Immortal tincture." And then of course that led to another discussion. And then somebody else said I had a call later. And they said, "What are you doing? You look absolutely amazing." So yeah, I mean, you're not making this stuff up.
No, I'm not making this stuff up.
Corroborate
I
the
mean, I get like
experience.
60 pages of testimonials from people about like what it's done, from like, curing injuries to accelerated wound healing to people coming off or like having reduced insulin or reduced blood pressure medication or reduced thyroid medication. Because basically what it does is it makes you operate at a healthier version of yourself. And obviously at the earlier, healthier version, the cells are, are able to produce the insulin or the thyroid, or the blood pressure normalizes. Obviously, I mean, I make some eye drops and people have been putting them in their eyes and they've been reporting all sorts of things like, diminishing of short, long distance vision. I mean, whatever, floaters have been disappearing. It just improves the functionality on when you apply it to wounds. It speeds up the healing of the wounds because, if you imagine the energy of your 16-year-old self versus your 50-year-old self, it's very different. The 16-year-old bounces out of bed and like does whatever and gets away with it. But I mean, this has only been going for about 2.5 years now. I came up with this 2.5 years ago. So we're still in the early stages. I can't say I'm going to live forever, but I do believe I will, because this is what the jellyfish does. It does two things. I mean, when we study the jellyfish, we get some insight into like what might occur. So what happens with the jellyfish is it's cruising along in the sea. And when it gets old, it sends this message to itself, which is basically not unlike a hormone. It's telling it to change its functionality. So when it gets this message, it drops down to the bottom of the ocean and it blooms again, or it gets injured. So it bashes against a rock and then it sends this message to the cells. They turn into undifferentiated stem cells and it blooms itself anew. But obviously we're different. We've got bones, we've got girlfriends, we've got cars, we've got houses, we've got cell phones, we've got more complicated structures. So it's a very different experience. But when I give it to my cat, who's about 10 now, the next day he's running around playing with the kitten. You can actually see the youthful vigor. He wasn't doing that the day before. And when you give it to arthritic dogs, all of a sudden they get all bouncy and they're running around. So this is, the hormone of regeneration of youth. When I even looked up the word youthening, it didn't exist because we're not even used to having this as a concept. And, there's a lot of pushback against this. But as I said, I've got 60 pages of testimonials from people who it's changed in many ways. I mean, for myself, I have to cut my nails twice a week. They just grow so fast. And this is an indication of good life force, good kidney chi, right? So if it's working there and on the skin, it must be benefiting us internally as well. And this is what we see as well. People's spikes in energy, improved functionality. I mean, this is really what we see with the jellyfish.
There's different levels of this Immortality elixir. I mean, you don't just have one either, right? You've actually crafted it so it's a progression. Is that based on sort of the philosophy of homeopathy, where you want to sort of, just something
Well, kind of loosely, it's more based on the philosophy of, and we all know this, like if you drink too much coffee, after a while, you need more coffee to get the same effect. So, or if you're burning sandalwood incense in a room every day, after a while, you don't smell it anymore. We adapt to a situation, the body adapts out of it. So what I've tried to do with the progression, and there's about, I think, 8 or 9 in the series now, and I've included mantras, I'll go into that in a second, but is to shift the goalposts. So we're always taking something slightly different. So we're not becoming acclimatized to it. So if we're taking a substance which is stronger, and I'll amplify the frequency and I'll add some mantras, we're then taking a slightly different substance, so the body's having an authentic response to it. And the idea here is not that any of them are better or worse or necessarily even stronger, than each other, but they're different. So if you imagine keys on a piano, we're able to get different sounds. Whereas if we're just plugging away at middle C, pling, ding, 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 after a while we just zone out. But if we can go up and down, we never get used to the sound and we get a fresh response from the body. So that's why I've developed the range, because I thought if people could take it, if they're going to take it ongoing, because it's obviously a message we're giving to ourselves, but what we're saying is we're overriding this normal programming of aging and death. We're saying we're going backwards. We're reversing the process. And it's interesting, a lot of people, when they took it, for the first time had dreams of driving their cars backwards. This was obviously the way the mind was able to make sense of what was happening internally biochemically in the body. Was they would throw up a symbolic representation for themselves to understand what was happening. And it often came as like walking backwards or driving backwards, because obviously we've got our conceptual stuff to deal with as well. The conceptual mind saying, no, this is not possible, old age and death and taxes. We've been conditioned to believe this to be the case, and like everything's like, oh, you have your 60 years, then you retire, and then you move to some place where it's warm and you get old and die. This is what we're conditioned into. This is what's been on the platter. This is what happens. But what if it wasn't? What if this is actually a way to move into a different way of being, because we live longer? Now, my hope is here that people will become better people because they realize they can't pass the buck and say, oh, well, my children will deal with the consequences of my action, and I'm going to drive a big gas guzzler and burn down the forest and whatever. It doesn't matter. But if they know that they're going to be there, they're going to be breathing the air, and they're going to be wanting to walk in the forests, then I do believe that this will make them more responsible and more as curators of the world rather than just as pillagers, which is
I think it's easier to go into a scorched earth mentality when you feel like shit, right? Versus if you feel good, you want to naturally exude that because you're full, your cup's full, and your capacity is sort of overflowing, and everything you do, your mind starts to think cleaner and better and more positive about the future. Versus, when somebody's angry, and when angry people when people mistreat other people, what do people say? Is that they're hurting inside, or they're angry, or there's something miswired within that person.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is what I've done with a lot of the immortalities as well, is I've mixed mantras in with them. Some, it's mostly Hindu, some rune stuff, but I mean, the idea is, I've used the Hindu stuff because it's quite archetypal. So there's an archetype, a masculine archetype of creation and destruction, and feminine of creation and destruction. So there's Shiva and Kali and Vishnu and Lakshmi. So, if you want to engage more with the feminine archetype of positivity and creativity and abundance, then you would take the Lakshmi. If you want the masculine, you take the Vishnu. Just to allow us to actually interface with these substances as, okay, well, I'm going to have a flavor on my immortality. I'm going to choose what I'm going to put into my body today based on what I need today. I had to do my tax return, right, the other day, and I know that when I do my tax return, I want to be extremely focused and very almost like Mad Maxian about it, because you can't be distracted and you've got to be very focused. So I take Immortality Kali, and then I breeze through it. It's like I've got pages and pages of stuff and receipts to go through, and I go through it and I just chew through it. But I don't take this when I'm necessarily playing with my daughter. Then I might take the Vishnu, or I've got Immortality Gaia and Asgard. I've got quite a range. It's not really the time to go into it here, but I mean, there's a document that people can look at, the Golden Box, which is like the synthesis of all of these things. And in that document, which we can put in the chat if you want, if people want to see what's there.
Where can I find it online? I do have it on my computer, but do you have it online?
Okay, cool. I mean, it's like people can't read it now, but they can download it, and then they can,
Do you have a link? Is there a link I can share for that, or?
I don't have it. I can get it, but I don't know how to put it here.
No worries. We can include it in the description below later, so you can send that along.
Yeah, no, we'll be there. Yeah.
Okay, so we got a question here from Vanessa. How does he add the mantra to the remedy? Can you explain a little bit more about that process?
Okay, so I've got a person who chants mantra for me. He spent 20 years in an ashram in India, and he's got a lot of devotion. They talk about bhavana, which is the spirit, the feeling of devotion. So he like, keeps himself on a very strict regimen, no coffee, no alcohol, no nothing. And then he, at 4 a.m. on the day of that particular mantra's alignment. So I think Vishnu or Lakshmi is on a Friday, Kali is maybe on. I know there's alignment, but he knows this stuff, right? So he'll go there and he'll wake up in the morning, 4 a.m, and he'll chant 108 of the mantra into distilled water, right? He'll then succuss it, which kind of seals the remedy into it, and then he brings it to me, and then I further amplify it and add it with these with the immortality. So it's like this is the technique of using this, and anyone can do this. They can chant over their water and then they can consume it. I mean, in a sense, they're actually taking it in. I mean, people praying over water and then drinking it. It's good practice because you're actually ingesting the imprint onto the water. And this is why water is so important, that clean water or spring water or distilled water is very different to the stuff that comes out of the taps or really dirty water, because it will take on the frequency of whatever's around it in addition to the substances. So we're kind of programming water with these archetypal frequencies from, I mean, when you
what
look
would
at
you
it,
say to somebody if they felt a little bit uncomfortable with the mantra aspect? Maybe let's just say that they didn't fully resonate with Hinduism.
Well, for me, it's the Hinduism's almost by the by. It's more like the mantra of Vishnu is the mantra of the preserver. So it's that aspect of preservation. When I take, it's not good or not, it's not bad. It exists in any religion or form. The Hindus just happen to.
It's that they have a very specific terminology for their deities that represent a certain archetype at a level that would be paragraphs long in English.
Paragraphs long in English, and if that mantra has been chanted 500 million times, it almost,
so there's some momentum to it. There's a weight.
It's got momentum. It's got charge. So you tap into that when you use that. But I mean, a lot of these mantras is like blessings to this aspect. And when you look at the deeper Hindu teachings, it's just talking about aspects of yourself. So you're actually just aligning to the aspect of that preserves or creates or destroys in yourself in order to get stuff done. I mean, Ganesh,
what you're saying is anybody that might have a uncomfortable reaction to Hinduism has to realize that it's really about articulating a certain aspect of themselves.
Totally. These are archetypal things, and you could find an equivalent in any other religion, like a mantra, like a devotional mantra with that aspect, whether it was Christian or, the Muslims would have an equivalent, the Buddhists definitely have an equivalent. So it's like these all exist as an archetype of the mother or the protector or the nourisher or the enricher or the, so in that sense, it really, it's one shouldn't trip over the mantras because they're really there just to benefit you. And when people take it, I was quite surprised when I took the Vishnu, because it's not really something I resonate with, but the guy who does my mantra, that was his lineage. So the Vishnu is the preserver. So there's the creator, the preserver, and the destroyer, and they're all aspects of the same thing. But the preserver is like the nitty-gritty level of like, okay, feed the dog, feed the child, feed the cats, it's very much the things of the world, like fix the roof. It's like the stuff which would normally be a bit of a drag, like, oh no, I've got to feed these cats, they're screaming. But in this mood, when you take it, everything just gets accomplished very easily. The image I had of it, I mean, I'm quite visual. So, what came to me as a visual of what's happening with this Vishnu was you lie in bed and you take your bow and you're lying on your back and you shoot, bing, and you get a bullseye, bang. But like every time, it's like stuff just gets accomplished. And it's like, wow, that was easy. That was nice. Why is it not always like this? So
it's very good for your taxes and for the menial days of the task list type of day. Yeah.
Just when you want to have a good day, you want to have a good day. You don't have to struggle with reality or anything. You want to feel good. You can add creation, which is all about feeling good on top of that. Then you're guaranteed a good day. There's no There's no way to really not have a good day if you take creation and vision together. That was my go-to for like a long time. I've made a
It was
remedy.
funny. I did take those two together. You gave them to me, and I remember sitting on the deck, and then there was some things that happened during the day that normally would have irritated me, and I'm like, I'm not even having a reaction to them. It's like it's just bouncing off the sides of me.
Yeah, I know. Well, this is what this stuff is there for. It's actually just to make your life a better place, so we can spend more of our time doing what we really want to be doing, and not so much of our time reacting. And
Mm.
sometimes we do need a reinstallation because the stuff has gotten a bit skewed, and like we are a bit reactive, and it might be childhood stuff, it might be societal stuff, it might be fear stuff we're getting from the media, but our nervous system has become this fraught thing. It's
Yeah.
become this like very reactive fraught thing, like this orange that's been punched too much and is leaking juice. But
Well,
if we can patch it up,
since COVID, I've noticed how reactive people are. Like their nervous systems are kind of humming, and you just need to give them an excuse, and they kind of fly into anger very quickly. So during these days, I mean, people need to be taking extra care of themselves in that way.
well, you know, I would argue that any modality, therapeutic modality, whatever it is, whether it's the somatic practices like yoga or, you know, Tai Chi or whatever, or, you know, this kind of energetic medicine or devotion, or it doesn't make a difference. But if you can speak directly to the nervous system and de-escalate it, you really get traction very quickly. You know, the image that came to me was the nervous system is like this lilo we're lying on this, you know, this I think around those little lilo is. It's like a plastic thing you float on in the pool. But we're on this lilo in the pool, floating on it. But if the lilo has holes in it, we're going to be jiggling all over the place, and we can try move our body. But if the lilo or support is unstable, it's not going to work. But if we can bolster that, then we feel held, and that's really what the nervous system does. It feels held, and then the body and the mind will calm down. So this is
Mm.
really where I've tried to work to like send these prompts, these messages of like, you're safe, you're held, you're fine, all is good, you win, the
Mm.
end, to the nervous system. And the nervous system eats it up like chocolate ice cream. It's like, oh, okay, yes, actually, I'm
I could
fine.
do a little poll. How many people would like to have a nervous system that just feels fine? Having a moment with my keyboard here. Feels fine. I like to do this sometimes. I like to just put out comments to people. So how many people would like to have a nervous system that just feels fine no matter what? Go ahead and comment on that one. And I got a resounding me and me. So people are down with that. We do have another very practical question. And someone's asking, can these remedies be purchased in Canada?
Yeah, well, I've got a distributor in the States. It
Mhm.
would have to come from the States, but I mean, it's close enough. I used
That's
to have a
easy enough. Yeah.
distributor in Canada, but liberationtheremedy.com, they're all available there.
Yeah,
So
let me just share this just so people can see the website. So we've got Liberation, the Remedy. This is his where you can order them. You can order these if you're abroad, you're not in South Africa. And you know, you can see all sorts of stuff here. Can they also get the book from the Remedies as well? Is that what Discover Your Remedy?
I can put them here. You can put it in the chat. I mean, I don't know how to send it to you. I think I sent it to you, the Golden Box booklet.
Yeah, I don't have a link for it though, right? You just can't be dropped
No.
on.
I don't have a link either because it's more. It's just a PDF. So
It's a beautiful PDF though.
yeah. But I mean, I can always just send it to you, and you can post it on there, and people can look.
So Liz Berman says these remedies changed my life. Truly amazing. So some of your testimonials have spilled over into this podcast interview.
Yes.
Yeah. And you know, really the point of this, you know, as much as it is to spread the words about your remedies, but I really like this idea that we can do things differently. That, you know, then we're sold from, you know, on one hand, the medical system, which is kind of brute force overpowering the body. And the other hand is sort of a very complicated, Eastern medicine or naturopathic medicine that, still gets very expensive and very long and tiring for people. And that, there is other paths that work with things that are more elegant, things that use innovation and high frequency, no pun intended, to allow the body to do what it does. And it seems it works on the level of messaging. It seems to kind of go into the core of your nervous system, the core of the cells, and say, this is really what you're supposed to be doing. You're just kind of caught in a pattern that doesn't allow you to realize that right now.
A lot of what I do is retraining stuff. Like there's a remedy called Creation I haven't talked about much, but I designed this around the best day ever. So, that was my brief. Like, okay, if I was to have the best day ever, not in terms of what would happen in the day, but like, what would I feel like for my best day ever? So I broke it down. It's like, well, I'll answer in a sec. So I wanted to be enthusiastic. I wanted to be open. I wanted to be playful. I wanted to be engaged, and I want to be creative. So I got substances which covered all of these things, and I threw them all together. And when people take Creation, it's just like their life just becomes easier because they're the best version of themselves, because they're actually kind of like themselves, and that just spills over. I mean, you're telling the cells on a deeper level, like, it's fantastic. You're bathing yourself in like royal jelly and the light of Jupiter and bee pollen and just all these glorious things. So the cells feel really spoiled. They feel like, oh, I feel great. And this translates into the emotions. And then, this is the mood we're going out into the world with, this sense of like, I feel great. And in that, a lot gets accomplished, and a lot of the problems which would normally be a problem get eradicated. Breastfeeding, let me just answer that.
Yeah, we just had a question about breastfeeding. Can you take it while breastfeeding?
There's one or two you could take. I mean, there's a remedy made from the blue lotus, which you can take when breastfeeding, and in fact, it's great for children, just to calm everyone down. Bear in mind, whatever you're taking is going to go into the child, right? When they drink the breast milk. So if the answer to that would be yes, and I would say the only one, there's two I would give with absolute certainty. There's one I've made from the golden spiral, where I've passed light through a statue of the golden spiral and captured that, and that's the ratio, the pi ratio that everything's built on. So that would be perfect, because that just brings everything back into balance. And then the blue lotus, which is all about calming the nervous system. Those are the two I would give. The other ones I'll be a little bit careful of. The Immortalities can be quite stimulating. Liberation would be good long term, but the mother-daughter bond at that time, it's very fraught anyway, and the last thing you want to do is take something that might change dynamics, or I would rather say to the mother, I mean, obviously if they're breastfeeding now, it's kind of too late, but to do it before they fall pregnant, so that they're carrying less of that into the child, so the child has to pick up on less of their patternings in their body and then have to play that out. But that would be my advice. It's just a state where everyone's quite emotional, and it's best to not do too much, in my experience.
So if you're hearing about this now and you're already breastfeeding, fine. But I mean, if you can plan ahead, take it now and then get pregnant. Cool. So we're getting a lot of praise here in the comments, by the way. Amazing to learn this. Thank you, David and Adam, for the interview, and Adam for these amazing creations. I got to say, Adam, I mean, I think this really contributes to a positive future, having these available, and I'm a big proponent of your work, and I'm very happy to have you on the show and be able to speak about this with you. And to everybody else, I mean, whether you're in South Africa, there is a South African website for locals, which is immortalskin.co.za. This is Adam's one for locals, and then also the Liberation, the Remedy.com is the one for internationals. And very excited that you actually went to the effort to actually get international distribution for this, because sometimes
I've got another site in England. I've got newmortals.co.uk and one in Dubai as well, beyondmedicines.uae. I mean, I've got other distributors, and I've got a distributor in Australia as well. So wherever you are, there's someone to get the remedies to you. So I can make
brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, Adam, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, and I feel like you've really touched on anything. Is there anything else that you feel you want to contribute before we to kind of close this off?
This is good. This has been a good circular thing. One thing I'd like to close with is, happy people make a better world, and the happier we are, the more chance we have to spill over into the rest of reality. But beyond that, like when I looked at what was stopping me achieving whatever I wanted to achieve, when I took the liberation, a lot of that stuff just disappeared, and I started just achieving what I wanted to achieve. And a lot of it was based in resentments and like old patterns and struggle. And like when I got rid of that stuff, my life has been easy ever since, to be honest. I mean, I'm super creative. I continue creating medicines and manifesting stuff, but I've never felt that any of it has been a struggle after that. It's been like, you're walking down a slope and it's like that, as opposed to toiling up a slope. It's been easy. There's been some heavy lifting, but it's all been done in the mood of fun. And this is the difference with this system of medicine, that it's very entertaining. It's amazingly reflective, and it's fun to play with, to like take control of your mind and not put your energy in the hands of a therapist, who may or may not be good. But here it's like it's you, and these things just allow you to mirror yourself and to see your states, and to be the best version of yourself. And in that, it's an exciting journey. That's what I want to convey to people, that engage us because it's fun, and it's productive, it's fun, and it's fascinating. For me, it's the most exciting journey ever, and it's totally personal. Everyone's dreams are going to be about them, not about anything I'm doing. It's like it's all totally personal, but that's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was a great way to segue out. And I just have to say thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, experiences, and sense of humor about the whole thing too. And I really feel like the people listening to this will be gravitating towards some of this. And I've tried this myself, and I got to say, this Adam's the real deal here. He's not making this up. These aren't fabricated stories. This is very true. And I can corroborate that with my own experience. So thank you, Adam. And if you guys are interested, we've got the links in the description below where you can find out more. Okay.
Thank you, Dave.
Yes. Thank you. Take care.
Go.
And for everybody else, we will be covering Into the Future with Human Design next week. So I'm going to have an excellent guest on the show. She's been 20 years in the system of human design, and we're going to be continuing along with, actually, the theme this month, Adam, is I am a creator. So talking about that creation is a beautiful thing to do, because that's what we're talking about, is people stepping into their infinite potential to go out and create and be happy in this world. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for contributing, and have yourselves a wonderful, wonderful day.
This is Octave Leap. Innovation, regeneration, and human optimization.